Hello, good evening, and welcome back. So, good news, the BBC is finally starting to understand the severity of the pandemic, or should I say, lack of severity. From Nick Triggle here, saying coronavirus is a time to free the healthy from restrictions. Yes, what a radical thought that we've been saying for so long, which is, if you're not at risk, why are you lumped in with everybody else? If it's a concern that it's coming from abroad, then why are they not quarantined instead of the people who are here in the country? And continuously still not quarantined when coming into Heathrow, which is still open and letting in 15,000 people a day. In that case, maybe there's something that should be done. And moreover, when they mentioned the deaths here, that they're saying it's for older people, most likely because of comorbidities, that they have other illnesses. We can see under 44, which isn't really young, it's middle-aged. The number of deaths comparatively to pensioners is ridiculous. And also bear in mind, this is the difference between contributing members of society as well. That, yes, I understand that when you're older, you're more likely to be richer, but you're also more likely to be living off savings instead of working for it, essentially. Because at that point, you've made your wealth and you're sitting pretty on it. And then when you get to that age of 65 and over into 70s, more often than not, your wealth starts to decrease as you end up spending it. So it's not as if they're contributing to the economy anymore, if you will. It's not as if the economic shutdown is affecting them directly. It's not as if they've lost their jobs because they didn't have one in the first place. So it's fine. So given that, what have people said? Well, Professor Mark Woolhouse, who's an expert in infectious disease who led the research, said that for the non-vulnerable population, so almost everyone, coronavirus carries no more risk than a nasty flu. If it wasn't for the fact that it presents such a high risk of severe disease in vulnerable groups, we would never have taken the steps we have and closed down the country. Well, why couldn't you just have quarantined them? Because he says, if we can shield the vulnerable really well, there is no reason why we cannot lift many of the restrictions in place for others. Why didn't you do that from the beginning? If that was your reasoning. Hindsight is 2020. It's not that. I mean, he's basically saying that we were wrong, because he's either saying, well, you're lying, because now you're saying, oh, we actually could do that. So why didn't you consider, maybe we should just quarantine the vulnerable if you knew it from the outset? That would make so much more sense. And if you're trying to support people and get the supplies where they need to go, but people aren't allowed to work in order to make those supplies or get them shipped over, then how the hell are you supposed to keep your health service afloat if they can't get the supplies that they need? It's never going to work. So he says the lockdown has come at a huge economic, social, and health cost. I'm glad he admits it has come at a health cost. Yes, elective surgeries, postponed, being inside, not getting exercise, sunlight, vitamin D, all that, you can't get it. But most importantly is this chart here, where it says chances of dying from coronavirus versus normal annual risk, from Professor Sir David Spiegelhalter, ONS from the Imperial College London. That, as we can see here, so how dangerous is the coronavirus compared to dying of something else? Because obviously you have to die of something, and normally when people get older, the main two things to die of now are cancer and heart disease, and we've pretty much cured everything else that's serious. And therefore, seeing as they're the main two things you can die from, if something else comes in, it's like, wow, it's such a big killer. It's like, well, maybe not. Maybe it's because you've been able to live so long because we've been able to cure so many other things that were fatal before. So not such a big deal. And as we see here, so the coronavirus death rate for people who, compared to the rate at which people would die anyway, as we see the uptick here, that for the younger people, for the people basically on average below 50, less than 0.1% fatality rate. There is no reason to be shutting down an economy for less than 0.1% of your working population. And yes, I know the 50 is a little bit over, and the working population doesn't, of course, go all the way down to 10 years old. I understand that. But it'll go down to 18, where it's below 0.01%. So yes, it's, I would say, the working population then, fatality rate of less than 0.1%. And that's the reason that they've closed everything down for 1 in 1,000, which apparently they knew beforehand, because they just thought that they couldn't quarantine the sick. With that in mind, seeing as they say that in the UK, they calculate that those under the age of 65 have faced the same risk over the past few months from coronavirus as they would have faced from driving 185 miles a day, the equivalent of commuting from Swindon to London. Strip out the under 65s with health conditions, about 1 in 16, and the risk is even lower, with deaths in non-vulnerable groups being remarkably uncommon. Putting risk in perspective is going to be essential for individuals and decision makers. Maybe the individuals could be the decision makers. If we do, we may learn to live with coronavirus. We may have to. I think the vast majority of people have actually lived with it. Isn't that funny? So with that in mind, seeing as they're saying, maybe it's about time we open things up, well, how has it been affecting people? Well, in the US, we've got 33.3 million unemployment claims. This is getting into the high teens now. And bear in mind, for every 1% increase in unemployment, expecting between 10 and 40,000 excess deaths. So we're expecting here, because it goes from 3.5%. So even if it just went up 10, that's 100,000 dead. But it could be up to 1 million dead because, of course, when the unemployment rate increases, it isn't a linear curve of 10 to 40,000 linear line. It is actually an exponential increase. And, the numbers getting this high is really rather unprecedented, as we can see here, compared to the average that we've got weekly total of new unemployment claims, compared to the weekly average 350,000, 3.3 million, 6.8 million, down 3.2 million again. The numbers here are just phenomenal. They're astounding. They're too difficult to really comprehend. And good on BBC for mentioning, just 2 months ago, the unemployment rate was at 3.5%, a 50-year low, which you could also call fully employed, because you're always going to have a couple of percentage of people who are basically between jobs. They have a worthwhile job, they've quit, and they're maybe taking a break, taking a holiday, traveling around, and they're not actually actively seeking work. They're waiting for either to come back and cool off and get back into work, or they have decided, I'm going to wait for a job that is in my field instead of taking a minimum wage job. I would spend my time better searching for a job, using all of my time instead of just in my spare time. So, also, they say food pantries have seen spikes in demand and homeowners and renters have delayed monthly payments. So it really is going around for everyone. They mention a man here who's found it difficult to keep his job. Yeah, fair enough. But they do say that they've got people who used to donate to food banks now having to use them because there just isn't enough to go around. And it is the same, that actual food shortages are happening. Moody's Investor Service has predicted that the unemployment rate could fall back to 7% by the end of the year. All being well, in which case you're going to have overall unemployment increase of about 4% or so. So it would be maybe predicted 60 to 100,000 dead because of the increase in unemployment, because they haven't then got the healthcare they need, because of malnutrition, because of suicide, because 1 in 5 are linked to losing their job. Other things that are going untreated, anything at all like that. So with that in mind, the people are going, well, I actually need to be able to feed my children. How are people taking it when they see people flouting the rules? And there seems to be an agreement that people are saying, yeah, well, we probably should report them, but don't like to. However, very, very, very uncomfortably, we've seen in New South Wales, for example, which has had a few hundred deaths in Australia, the entirety of Australia. They said that more than 5,000 calls were made to the police in the week that followed. That it's ridiculous, and it's gone so far as to say that obviously we know that the crime that the police are ignoring, that they say some callers had the wrong end of the stick. Police were alerted to a couple's holiday pictures on Facebook, only for officers to discover on a doorstep visit that they were more than a year old. Yeah, they actually thought they were investigating this by going over to try and prosecute and reprimand the people for having a photo from a year ago. Do you not think there are better ways to spend the time? If money is so short and the economic downturn is so difficult, is this really a good way for police to be spending their time? No, of course not. But wouldn't want to be going over those grooming gangs, now would we? No. And the same all over in Singapore and South Korea, even in America. Of course, you've got Cuomo's image service that you can send him images, and that's definitely going to be photos of people breaking the law, and snitches don't get stitches, they get rewards. No, please no. But some people are sick of it, as we saw, of course, with Shelly Luther, who had a hair salon. She had waited over a month in order to get the business payment that she should have got from the government, that little rebate of sorts, the little loan, to say, okay, you can hopefully afford to keep your business open because we're giving you funding. but that month, that took too long. She didn't know how long it was taking. She had no answer, and therefore she went, well, hey, I need to be able to feed my children because otherwise I don't have enough money. And therefore, she had her hair salon, and she decided to open it back up. So when she had her citation for saying, oh, you can't stay open, instead she publicly ripped that up. And it's not as if she was then flouting the rules with the hair salon by everyone bundling in. No, of course not. They were still keeping social distancing. They were wearing gloves. They were wearing masks. They were disinfecting things. They were keeping everything clean. They were doing everything exactly as you would expect them to do if there was any semblance of sense. But they had a business open, which someone somewhere somehow said was non-essential. Yeah, it's ridiculous. But nonetheless, and for that she was given a $7,000 fine and a $500 fine every day her business was open, and also 7 days in prison. And thankfully, after Judge Moyo told Ms. Luther that the rule of law governs us, people cannot take it upon themselves to determine what they will and will not do, and trying to get her to apologise for her selfish acts, and Luther, of course, saying, well, feeding my kids is not selfish, because of course it isn't. That he was just being vindictive, essentially, the judge, to say, oh, you've got to apologise and atone for your sins to our Lord Sokjas. So thankfully, this has now been overturned. There was a Kickstarter which raised, I think, $250,000 as well as other people who were publicly backing her and funding, of course, including Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, saying that he would have the 7 days house arrest and cover the $7,000 fine just fine. And the Texas Supreme Court stepped in finally and ordered her freed from a Dallas County jail. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton described the judge's order as a political stunt. Damn right. We just thought that was way over the top, he told CBS. It was an abuse of discretion, and that judge should not put people in jail like her who were just trying to make a living. And there were a couple of other people who were let out as well, who had previously been imprisoned. The difference with this lady, of course, is that she's made it very public, and given the option of saying, hey, if you apologise, then won't send you to jail. And she went, no, I'm not apologising. This is ridiculous, and kept it going. And speaking of people who were getting out of jail and being not quite pardoned, but being let out, Michael Flynn, yeah, the one where the FBI weren't trying to find the truth. They were just trying to put dirt on him, and then tried to get him to plead guilty so that they would protect his son and not throw him under the bus, basically. And you look at the documents that have been released to say that they were just trying to find dirt, and they finally said, yep, it's fine. The US Department of Justice is dropping the criminal charges against Michael Flynn, which is fantastic. We are hoping that Trump will have it in his thoughts to pardon Flynn. The reason for that is that when the House goes back to Democrats and the administration is Democratic on as well, then of course they could bring this back up and try to indict him again later on. Whereas of course if he's pardoned for all of the charges, then they won't be able to do that. So that's what we're hoping. But hey, good news. You're not at risk of the coronavirus. You knew you weren't. People are getting sick of this. They're taking the hit and then realizing that they have full public support behind them, and so there isn't much of a hit. And the tide is definitely turning, and it again shows we can't trust governments to keep us safe because it came out from the CCP anyway. Huge government, the CCP flew after all, and they couldn't keep their country safe. Then international organizations like the World Health Organization, they can't keep us safe. And then when the governments know that it's coming over to us, their idea is to do a nationwide lockdown, and they can't keep us safe, and it's still happening. So, in short, government can't keep us safe at all. They haven't got our best interests at heart, or if they have, then they're very deluded. In which case, again, it just comes down to individual people to step up and say, well, yeah, I'm actually going to need to get back to work now. This was all fun and games, but I actually need to be getting on and actually staying alive and eating. So, thanks for all that, but it's worth the risk. So, good news, the tide is turning, the pendulum is swinging. Hopefully, this will be another feather in the cap to say, you can't trust big government, they don't know what they're doing, they can protect the laws, make sure that the non-aggressive principle isn't violated, keep law and borders, that's fine, but when they try and step into other areas of life, you know that they're going to screw up, and they're never held accountable, because that's how government works. So until next time, have a good one.